The biggest challenge is how you affect the first really big change to a building that is, I think it's fair to say now, recognised as an icon. I mean, there's a kind of absolute cliche that you always get lost when you come to the Barbican, and we all do, and that includes staff. Design started in the 50s. We weren't complete until 1982. So it has this odd kind of, born of post-war optimism and then delivered in absolute proto-capitalist political landscape. It's a really odd, schizophrenic kind of place. Concert halls can be really imposing. How to create spaces that people just feel comfortable to walk into.
Hey guys, I've got a quick request. Could you subscribe, like, and comment if you like the content we're making? It's really important to support the channel and carry on having great guests like we've had. So subscribe, like, comment. Very important. Thank you. Thank you very much, Philippa. Welcome to High Point. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast. Obviously, we're here to talk about the Barbican Centre, but I would like to thank you first because you replied positively to my invite, and there's not a lot of people who reply, and let alone not a lot of people who reply positively. So thank you very much.
Oh, great pleasure. Nice to be here.
I would like to ask you, obviously, a lot of questions around the plans around the Barbican, but maybe first ask you a few questions about you and who you are, what's your background, and put everything into context, and maybe a bit of history about the Barbican, the renovations, if you know some of them. So first of all, can I ask you to introduce yourself the way you would like to be introduced?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Philippa Simpson, Director for Buildings Renewal at the Barbican Centre. I've been here a year now, almost exactly. Joined from previous roles in the cultural sector, worked at the V&A, worked at Tate. That's my sort of background, really. And come from a slightly odd career trajectory, if I'm honest. Sort of started working as a curator, worked in exhibitions, moved into capital development of cultural buildings, and have been doing that for the last, I guess, kind of 10 to 12 years.
Is your position very all the experience you've got from the past was very applicable to the project here? What are the differences generally between your new role and the previous roles? Is it very similar?
Oh, good question. Incredibly different, actually, in this context, for lots and lots of different reasons, I guess. I joined the Barbican because it is probably my favourite place in London. And I knew there was a project coming up and sort of sat on the sidelines for a year, hoping that something might crop up that would give me a way in. And then it did, which was fantastic. But certainly in my previous roles, largely working in Victorian buildings, always working with big collections of objects, and then suddenly making a leap to a building which is, a 20th century icon, younger than me, and a place which is entirely people-led. So it's performing arts at its heart, although it does have 2 galleries. It covers every single art form, sort of cinema, theatre, music, visual arts, immersive installation, digital learning programs, everything you can imagine. But it really is, my experience of it anyway, somewhere that has a real interest in audiences, in performers, in the immediacy of politics, actually. So it kind of operates in a very agile way. It's very quick, it's very swift, incredibly energetic, very, very busy all of the time. It operates kind of pretty much every hour of the day, which, museums do. They have events after closed hours, but in terms of just public opening, demands on this building are enormous and pretty much endless, actually, of every sort. And we also host an enormous number of commercial events. So in total, 4,000 events a year happening here, which is incomparable in the museum world. So there's that. And I think the other thing, which, more kind of architecturally speaking, is this move from buildings which have had to adapt a lot over the last 150 years or whatever it is in their lifetime to suit different needs of audiences and to keep up with technology and, adapt to changing climates and all the rest of it. And so there's a real, they've become used to being responsive, I suppose, in a physical sense in that way. Whereas the Barbican is still in this perfect moment of establishing itself as an architectural icon while having to future-proof and think about, how it really serves audiences and serves future generations for the next 50, 100 years. So we're doing this very delicate tightrope walk of looking after it and securing it and establishing it while we're trying to regenerate it, revitalize it, think forward. It's quite actually thinking about it. It's not dissimilar to how the City of London is in sort of it's quite archaic and quite progressive at the same time. You're constantly backwards and forwards looking. So I would say don't think anything prepared me for it, being honest. It's a completely different environment to what I'd experienced before. It might be worth mentioning, I'm sure we'll talk about it anyway, that we operate as a department of the City of London Corporation, which is a local authority in part. And I was used to DCMS-funded organisations, which have a slightly different degree of autonomy. So, we can unpack that for days and days, or as much as you want to talk about. But I'll just posit it for now as another major distinction coming here.
Obviously, there's loads of questions around what are you doing exactly and why are you doing it? Why is it so useful to do renovations, and what can you alter? What do you not want to alter? Can you briefly recap what the Barbican Centre is when it was built? How big is it, like the estate? Because I think we don't realise how massive it is.
It is absolutely vast. So a little history then of the Barbican Centre and estate more broadly. So first thing to do is probably to make the distinction between, we sit within a huge residential estate. There are something in the region of 2,500 flats. It accommodates 4,000 people, basically. And it was born out of the destruction of the Second World War. So Cripplegate, which is the area that we sit within, was totally decimated during the war. And we are now on a site where I think previously something like 45 homes stood. And in order to regenerate this area, but also to have enough people to return votes to allow the city to continue to exist as a local authority, they developed this enormous housing scheme. And at the heart of it, and in a really sort of forward-thinking way, placed a cultural centre, which is the Barbican Arts Centre, which conceptually is brilliant because it means we occupy the absolute heart, not only of the square mile, but of this, amazing complex, and where people, the people who live here are, we've got architects and lawyers and members of the city, and we've got politicians, and, it couldn't be a more interesting environment to work in. But it means on the flip side that we are sort of carved out of space that was left over. Not quite that simple, but, we exist largely underground. We are dug down very, very deep, alongside or over tube lines and everything else, which means that the management of space and the relationship between different spaces is very complicated and very difficult. Access is tricky, enormously tricky, not least for maintenance, but actually even more importantly, incredibly difficult for audiences. So you tend to get, there's a kind of absolute cliche, you always get lost when you come to the Barbican, and we all do, and that includes staff. So it's not an easy building in that respect, but it is one that was born of ambition and a huge degree of optimism, which I love. And that spirit, I think, still infuses the whole as an operation and as a building. You really feel it. And this kind of, stepping into the estate is like stepping into this amazing utopian/dystopian dreamscape every day. Every day you come here, you're kind of amazed by it. And I can say that now from experience. So it really is the most extraordinary place. So that's a very quick potted history. Design started in the 50s. We weren't complete until 1982. And in fact, we have two other sites currently decommissioned, which won't complete till 84. So it's gestation, if you like, and birth and delivery were long. So it has this odd kind of, born of post-war optimism and then delivered right in the middle of, absolute proto-capitalist UK political landscape. It's a really odd kind of almost schizophrenic kind of place. So that's the background. It's huge. It's complex. We occupy kind of 6 floors, I guess, or more, and a range of different types of building. We've got, as I said, theatres, galleries, concert halls. We've also got a massive conservatory, got a giant plant room, a third the size of Wembley, that sits under it all, that is the engine of the place. And yeah, I suppose it's because you can never take it in as a whole. It's always hard to conceive of its scale.
What other renovations happened? I think if you don't know, that's fine. I just saw a few articles on different renovations, including the hall. But maybe the hall, we won't discuss about it. Yeah. Are you aware of all of them or most of them on the main renovation and reorganizations maybe?
Yeah. The truth of it is, over the last kind of however long it is, 42 years, I would say there have been these kind of moments of intervention to try to respond to how the building's being used and how it's performing, and make enhancements and help people kind of navigate and use it, because it is such a kind of mixed use space. There have been a few interventions in the hall. They were quite early, actually, to help with acoustics before the building was listed, actually, I should say. So the site is all Grade 2 listed, the estate and the centre all as one. But that wasn't until kind of not quite 20 years on in its history. So there were first kind of period where adjustments were still being made. It's almost like long snagging, if you like. And then more substantive interventions, both during the 90s and the early thousands, often looking at things like access. So we had some new walkways put in to help with level access from our only street-facing door on Silk Street, which is really sort of on what you might call the back of the building. One of the issues that we've had, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will be aware of it, but is the fact that we were conceived as part of a much bigger plan to introduce high walks and pedways across the whole of the city, which would allow pedestrian access an elevated level, and then you would drive everywhere else. But of course, people don't drive; they use tubes and they use buses sometimes, or they cycle. But really, that kind of car-led infrastructure never really took off. So we exist now in an island with a few walkways that go to pretty much nowhere, or just somewhere close by in the city. And everyone's looking for our front door, and it doesn't really exist because you were meant to come up and over and in to the heart of the centre, where we have a lovely, generous kind of lake and lakeside terrace, and a lovely big front to the building. So a lot of later interventions are really about, I suppose, trying to deal with that and trying to kind of compensate for it. Lots of new wayfinding schemes, but the truth of it is, it's remained sort of largely untouched, other than things where let's take as an example, the lighting scheme, which began to fail and you couldn't get replacements. And so there's been kind of patch repairs or bits of maintenance or things have just been stripped out and left. So I guess where we're at now is, how do we return its former brilliance and glory, but in a way that's meaningful for audiences today?
When did you know, or did the Barbican Centre think, okay, we really need to do something? And then I presume it's going to be part of like a whole renovation plan for the whole city of London, or London generally as a city, which, by the way, one of the future guests will probably be able to describe a bit more London. He's called Shane Shapiro, and he's got a book that where he works for Sound Diplomacy, he's CEO, and I think there's going to be some nice answers about it. But yeah, that's small promotion for the future episodes. But what are the plans for? What were the general plans, and when did the Barbican Centre started to think about doing something and improving or readapting it for now or the future?
Yeah, no, it's a good, and let's like, maybe this can be a good warm-up act then for your later guest. Let's see if we said the same things. Are we interested? So,
Thank you.
no, it's curious. I will listen in. So it predates me. I mean, I must say that, of course. So it's kind of 3 years ago now, maybe a little longer. And I think there was a widespread recognition that actually, the truth of it is, it takes a while for buildings to get recognized for their iconic status or for the value that they have architecturally or culturally, often for a city or a country. And I think this often is the case that is around this kind of age that people are like, oh yeah, actually that's, we want to make sure we care for it. By which time often, and this is not unique to the Barbican, it's a little too late. It hasn't been, we'll be honest, brilliantly maintained over the past 40 years. And it got to the point where, plant was redundant, things aren't working, huge problem with leaks, which we can come back to later, but that's what you get when you build everything down into the ground and on top of each other. It's, an absolute water trap. So that's an issue. And, very wisely, actually, at that point, to my mind, and this is watching on as an observer elsewhere in the kind of cultural landscape, the city decided to take a more holistic approach and to think comprehensively about what you do with the estate. So they went to competition. They appointed an architectural and engineering team to come and work on a master plan for the whole site and also its decommissioned spaces, the ones that aren't currently in use. And at that point, really, I think it was about a scoping exercise as much as anything to understand what was needed and what might be done and how. And that team sort of picked it up and ran with it. And I would say, to an extent, redefined that scope actually, and looked at it not only as an opportunity to rescue, if you like, or restore, or to kind of make functional again the site, but to think about genuinely what it would mean to do a proper, full revitalization of the site. So not just a restoration, but how it serves into the future. And so a master plan was developed, and it was taken up to REBA stage 2, which is exactly the point at which I joined, actually, which is around sort of March, April last year. I came on at the end of April. And at that stage, the city had invested heavily in the development of the master plan. And we were then charged with identifying really the priority areas, like what's the most important projects that you can pick out of this and take forward to further design stages and then implement across the next 5 years, and work out what kind of investment would be needed to do that. So really a kind of urgency-led piece, but also audience-led. And so So that's kind of very brief, kind of, a more immediate history of the project. And when I came in, there was sort of, I would say, maybe there are kind of three areas that we looked at. Obviously, health and safety, there just is an issue. We have to make sure that we're a safe plant building. That goes without saying. But of course, we operate in a different legislative environment now than when we were open. And, so there's a bit of catching up, perhaps, let's say, maybe to do. So a bit around that, a bit around sustainability, make sure we are super efficient. The city has some really punchy net zero targets. And we are the biggest user of energy and carbon in the city. We account for 20% of the energy use of the city as a whole. So we are a substantial beast. So, so we need to fix ourselves if they're going to get to their targets. So that was a big driver. So which areas will have most impact in that respect? And then in terms of our values, but also the strategic aims of the city, inclusivity. And for us, that's about kind of audience-led approach. We want to welcome more people into the Barbican Centre and into the Square Mile. So what adaptations, what changes do we need to make to the building to enable us to do that and to make sure that we're building audiences of the future, both for us and for the city more broadly, drawing tourism, which of course, is a really important generator for the country as a whole. So we looked across all those different areas, very complex, kind of bit of matrix decision making.
And sorry, what's the conclusion then? Do you have any conclusions yet?
No, we have the conclusion. I just wanted to frame it so that you understand why we got there.
It's a good teaser.
It is. Foundation laying. No, the conclusion is that, and it's interesting where it led us, was pretty much, right, we look at the infrastructure, of course, and we deal with the plant. That's a kind of non sequitur. We have to do that. But otherwise, what we're doing is looking at all the spaces around the site which sit this side of the paywall. So it's all our big open public civic spaces, our foyers, the lakeside terrace, the conservatory, everywhere that you can come in without a ticket, pretty much, to make sure it is more accessible, that it is operating efficiently, and that we're dealing with the envelope of the building. We're a fabric first approach, and that all of our plants and infrastructure is as efficient and as green as it can be, and that we are climate resilient. And our catering block is the other one to mention. So all of our kind of bar and restaurant facilities, which of course all within it includes toilets and introducing new visitor facilities such as quiet rooms, prayer rooms, changing places. So that's been our sort of remit over the last not quite 12 months, which is to develop design for those. We are just finishing in a week's time, actually, on REBA Stage 3 for all of those and going into planning in July.
What's the overall budget for all of this?
First 5 years, 231 million. And we have already secured 191 million of that from City of London Corporation, and we're fundraising against the rest. So that's a kind of a live conversations on our side, just to make sure that we can really deliver fully actually against the ambitions of the programme as a whole.
I know you don't communicate too much on the whole, but that doesn't include the whole, what you've just announced?
No, it doesn't. That is true. However, I should be clear in saying that, as I said, the master plan that was taken to REBA 2 did cover every single area of the building. And those that are being touched in this phase, we are keeping as live conversations. We are looking always at options for improvement and making sure that we're ready once this is kind of fully underway to go back and revisit those and start teeing up the next phase, which, this is overall probably a good 15 years worth of work.
A very naive question, but it could be very useful for me and other people, other designers. How did you decide on the competition? Did you say you ran a competition to get all your advisors, or you also got some advisors before running the competition? Sorry, can you
I can unpack that, yeah. And this predates me, so I'm answering on behalf of others. So I will give as much as I can. But yeah, so it was a full international competition run through the City of London Corporation and shortlisted. I think it was 6 practices, or consortia, I should say, because it was all sorts of different subcontractors with a lead design practice. And it was submission of concepts and presentations, and then the team that's been appointed is led by Allies and Morrison, with a kind of co-design lead of Asif Khan Architects Studio and Bureau Happold Engineering, and then a number of other different sub-consultants. So Charcoal Blue on acoustics and AV, Harris Bug on horticulture for the conservatory. So it goes on and on. I mean, it's pretty granular.
And do you know why these were selected or retained as winners?
Yeah, to an extent. And I certainly know little of the history of it, just from kind of, again, from observing and meeting the team before I started. So I think one of the big sells was and this was certainly in their pitch, which is that they were not going to add a single square meter. So the idea is that you work absolutely within the existing footprint, and that actually the approach was as sensitive as possible as it could be to the existing building. So it's always kind of restoration first. It's always about sort of declutter, take out, make sure that we're looking back at the kind of bones and the skeleton of the place, and then taking cues from that. And that's been really evident to me, actually, as the designs have progressed. There's very much I'll take as an example the lighting, which is really parlous, I have to say. And I think anyone that's been knows how dark the spaces can get. That the scheme that's rolling back out is actually a recreation of the original light fitting, but with LED technology, so that it's a greener version of what it was always meant to be. And the second thing I'll say, so that's the kind of design side of it. But the second thing is more of a kind of philosophical approach, I would say, that, and again, I feel it's very strongly coming in and is something that I've picked up a lot from the project and design team, which is looking back always to the spirit of place. So this is, as you said right at the start, a place that came with a really bold vision. It was audacious in its scale and its ambition. And it was all about sort of attracting people and remaining vital and being absolutely on the now every moment, if you like. And so trying to kind of interpret what that means for us today, taking responsibility for the building. And that's been a sort of informative way of thinking about what we're designing. So I think that's what won over them, really.
And had you been part of a jury for other competitions in the past? I presume yes, or like some tender?
Yeah.
So again, another naive question. As an acoustician, when do you make the choice of selecting the design team and mainly around the architect? Why? So there's a lot of, it's an international competition, so you invite people from outside of the UK. What would be the benefits of having an architect who's not based in the UK and will be leading the design, and obviously having some relay and a local architect as well? But what can you tell me all the ins and outs of that and the reason?
So I've sat on a huge number of design competitions in my previous role because I covered both capital projects and exhibitions. So we were appointing, almost every other month, one thing or another. And I would say when you're working in organizations or institutions that are, properly part of a global network of cultural kind of organizations, which the V&A definitely was, which the Barbican is, which Tate was, then actually you're not seeing yourself only in the context of British design. So I think there's something about that. I think it's that you want to make sure that on every single project, because no one, for me, it's like, well, this is how I feel about it anyway. No one project was the same. It was always about finding the right fit between, especially in museums, it's about, between curators and design teams. And here it's between, users, people who are programming theatre, whatever it is, and the team. Really, it's team dynamic. And there's no reason why that should be constricted or contained to just the people who live within these shores, I would say. And I think there's something about crystallizing thought. That's the other thing which I find really significant about the competition process and why it is so, so important to be rigorous and go through interviews and really take your time. Because what always happens is, as a client, you're not one person, you've got usually kind of, there are 10 close people to the project, and then you've got your 100 stakeholders, and then your 1,000 interest groups. And you know what I mean? So you're representing a huge number of people in these public organizations. And as much as you think you're aligned internally on what you want, and you think you've articulated it in your brief perfectly, and you've been really clear and instructive, and in some cases over prescriptive, when people come back and reflect it back to you and show you what's possible to think of or what's possible to respond with, that's when you really crystallize what it is you want. You need the straw men, if you like. You need the kind of provocations for you as a client body to begin to galvanize, crystallize around. And then once you've got to that, you can really then understand what it is you need and who you need. So I think just going through that process and throwing it as wide as possible is the only way to get the very best results, in my opinion.
I remember for the Bobo in Paris, the Pompidou Centre as well, that's the other word. They didn't want to know the name of the architects and where they were, so they were completely blindfolded and just saw the design. I presume you've never done something like this, or maybe you have.
I have not done that. No, I love the idea of it though.
It was quite interesting to know this, and maybe it led to a much more impartial selection, maybe.
But were they choosing off paper? This is the thing, is like, I would never want to appoint without having been in a room with a team and really felt how the dialogue happened, not just between me and them, but between colleagues and them and subcontractors within the team. And you need the energy and the dynamic, I think, to make a really meaningful appointment. So while it's nice to see the designs blind, I think you still need to personally, it's hard to do it without meeting the team.
And when do you decide to do a competition and a tender? Or sometimes you say, we've got these consultants or advisors and we really like them. We've got a really good relationship with them, and therefore there's no need to do a competition or a tender. Or maybe because it's for public reasons, you always have to do a tender. What's the thought process around all this?
Well, we always have to tender because we're public sector or local authority or whatever. So I've never been in a position actually, or what one might call the luxury of just being able to select. But I'd never want to be honest. I mean, it's not so true. I mean, if there's a tiny, tiny project and fees are incredibly low, you can sometimes pick off people that you know will be really good at doing that tiny thing because you've got experience with them and you're up against a timescale. But it's incredibly rare, honestly. It really is. I mean, we don't operate here with a framework, which I know a lot of places do for architectural services or lighting services or MEP or anything. We can, if we really want to, pick off public sector frameworks, particularly for things like, for the other kind of consultancies, QSing, project management. But in all honesty, I've never found it massively helpful because everything is so unique. So, and as I said before, I think going to competition, even if you just do a tiny one and you don't have to go fully open always, you can just kind of shortlist 3 or shortlist 6 or whatever you want. Unless you see a range, you can never really know what it is you want. Honestly, you think until you see something that shows you actually you wanted this, or kind of something you never even thought of. So I just think it's endlessly valuable. Feels time consuming, but I really think. And the other thing is as well, actually, sorry, just to kind of absolutely get on the box about it.
We've got time to develop.
Okay, excellent. You can always cut this.
Take your time.
Thank you. Oh, don't say that. I'm an absolute nightmare for you. But it's that actually, we have a responsibility in our positions to foster new talent. And if you're constantly just going back to the people the pool just gets smaller and smaller, and big practices grow, and small practices die and die. And then we wind up wondering why there's no one else to go to, and we've only got ourselves to blame. So at some point, you need to open it out and just, give somebody the chance and take the punt every now and again when you can. And even if you don't, always take the time to give feedback so that people can, because it's not just the skill of designing, it's the skill of pitching. The skill of pitching is horrible. I'm so glad I'm not an architect. Anyway, but, I think helping as much as you can with that process is part of the responsibility of being a client.
Well, I can't agree more with you because we're fairly a young practice. So we keep wanting to say, okay, try us. We're different.
Keep doing it. Come to us.
So how will the plans will be delivered, in how many phases? Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, we've got the first 5 years kind of plotted out and programmed. And then we've got a sort of 10 and 15 year outlook. So I think, over the 5, so the kind of 5 years comes to an end. The second lot of 5 years, if you like, we'll be looking at all the spaces that we've talked about that we're not touching this time, plus our decommissioned spaces to see what might be possible for their redevelopment. And then the longer term, the kind of final 5 years is really about picking up all of the long-term infrastructure work that we need to do that just takes ages because access is so difficult, and picking apart an entire sort of, not even an exoskeleton, what do you call it? But it's kind of, entire nerve system, if you like, of the building just needs to be done methodically and slowly.
The hot question around the Barbican Centre is about the music situation in London. There was the Centre of Music that was stopped. Was it going to be on the estate of the Barbican or something like this? I think I read an article about it.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so kind of sort of, yes. Museum of London site, which isn't ours. It's not part of the centre, but it sits within the broader estate. Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, you're not going to communicate too much on it. You can't, but maybe you can.
That's me.
No, it's more about the situation. And we had a guest on the podcast, and we turned it into a reel actually, and he did quite well about the situation on the concert halls in London. Obviously, everybody knows, and it's accepted. It's been this proof, especially in terms of acoustics, that there's no world-class concert halls in London, not as world-class as other cities. And therefore, there's been loads of plans around solving it. So, improving existing halls. So, yeah, what's the situation and what can you say, and what is being done? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, so it is a brilliant question. And I mean, where to start with it? So I think the first thing to say is that everybody recognises the issue. I don't think anyone disputes it. I think we don't have enough music venues in London as a total, and that's not just concert halls. I mean, that's a pretty much any, we're also missing kind of small and medium-sized gig spaces, standing venues, so it's a notable gap. We also don't have enough studios, and rehearsal studio. I mean, everybody sees that, I think, is the first thing to say. I think there is a real sort of commitment within the City of London in the Square Mile to driving forward this area as a creative and cultural hub, and thinking really laterally about what that means in terms of creating networks of spaces. So rather than having lots of different venues that are cannibalizing each other or in competition, actually, how can we be properly complementary and collective in our thinking? And that's something which I've really felt, not just that it was sort of seeded recently, but has really accelerated, I would say, over the last 12 months, that way of thinking and working across the different departments of the city. And that's been really thrilling. And I do feel like I landed at a very lucky moment for that, because the opportunities seem rife, actually. The site that you're talking about is still kind of out for development, and planning permission was secured for something which didn't include at that stage a venue, but at the moment is undergoing judicial review. So that's kind of public knowledge. That's ongoing. But of course, there are always sites in the city that are being considered for development. We know that obviously the London Museum opening at Smithfields soon, and various kind of areas of that market which are now no longer going to be a market. And we have our own kind of, as I said before, decommissioned spaces. There are always opportunities, and so thinking about where these sorts of venues might sit. What is the optimal type of space, how that would operate, who would operate it? All those questions are very live. And I would say that's also within the kind of broader context of the GLA and the GLA's commitment to making sure London serves as a creative hub, and actually about not just providing an offer for audiences, but actually pipeline skills development. Where are the training facilities, where are the opportunities for emerging talent to be platformed, all that kind of stuff. So again, it's a very sort of almost kind of 3-4 dimensional conversation that goes on around this, which feels like actually, if it can all be drawn together, could be really quite transformative. Anyway, so that's I think where the thinking is.
I've always wondered why we think we need a world-class concert hall, because again, Shane Shapiro, the next guest, says in his book that obviously classical music is very, very particular and very niche style of music and genre. And then there's loads of other types of music that can be played that are a bit more social, or there's a different population that attends those events. And instead, I was thinking, instead of having a concert hall that is where you can hear very well an orchestra with excellent acoustic conditions, why don't we create satellite places that still promote music, but for loads of different genres? Because we need to recognize that classical music is not the only maybe world-class music genre, and there's loads of others. And instead of creating a classical music city, we need to create a musical city where all styles mix and cultures mix. So maybe this is more, I don't know, I'll ask Shane. I don't know if you've got an answer in this.
I have an opinion. Don't know if it's an answer, but I'm happy to share it. I mean, I tend to agree. I do think, the issue is we've always seen all of these things as somehow exclusive. So it's like as if the audience for classical is not also the audience for contemporary, which is absolutely not the case, And so, and I think, what the real answer here is flexible space, isn't it? And understanding more what can be done to cross-fertilize and mutually support. I think, the Barbican program is probably, I'd love to say, actually, I think it is probably the most extensive in the world. It's extraordinary. You can range from Lang Lang here one week to Jockstrap the next. And, and the audience is not totally different for both. People are coming to both. I went back, that sort of thing. So I think it's about how you create space that can really accommodate all of that is flexible, but also has a vernacular, because it's not just about, partly it's about acoustics, it's about functionality, but it's also about a vernacular of space. How do you create spaces that people just feel comfortable to walk into? Concert halls can be really imposing, and if you're not comfortable, you don't feel culturally enfranchised, or you're not from that background, or this is unfamiliar territory, then you're never going to build the new audience. The classical audience then will die away. So space plays a really important role in keeping audiences live and building them back up again. And I think, we work really closely, as you can imagine, with Guildhall School of Music and Drama, because they're our neighbours, and indeed we're sort of absolutely literally joined at the hip architecturally. And they're fantastic. And of course, nowhere better in terms of building the next generation of performers, and not just performers, actually people that work in the vast kind of ecosystem of putting on productions. And we're always talking about how can we use spaces that may not always seem most obvious. How can we create much more flexible kind of informal spaces for encountering music unexpectedly? So I couldn't agree more. Musical cities, that's what it's about, because they all talk to each other and people move between spaces. It becomes fluid. And it also means that musically a dialogue between classical and contemporary is enabled, which is always where the kind of really exciting stuff happens. So that's how I feel about it. Personal opinions rather than those of my organisation, perhaps.
So one question I've got is, and from working on a few other places, is that the money given to those places is just for the benefit of the whole area and not just the centre itself, or let's say the performing arts centre venue. Quite a few of them, they're not planning on making any money at all. The money is just invested to rebuild or renovate the place or build a new place, and the rest is for the benefits of the area around. What are the plans for the Barbican Centre? Is it just a place for the City of London, or there's a place that's going to obviously run by itself but generate money as well? What are the plans or economic plans? Do you know?
Let me see if I can answer. I think I understand the framing of the question, which is quite broad, but let me see if I answer it. And if I don't, tell me that. No, it's great. It's great. We don't just serve the City of London. It's the first big thing to say. We are, the City of London is our biggest funder. We are, for want of a better phrase, subsidised in the same way that almost every single big art centre is across the UK. So most venues of our sort, in some form or another, whether it's from DCMS or Arts Council England or from their local authority, hover somewhere between usually 30 to 50% subsidised, and the rest is revenue generated either through ticket sales or through development and fundraising or through kind of catering commission or whatever it is. So, and we are within that bracket broadly. That's where we sit. And so the City of London subsidises, and the rest comes through those different streams. We're not absolutely unique in this respect, but we are one of very few places that is local authority funded, but serves both locally, nationally, and internationally. So we see ourselves absolutely as somewhere for the nation. So people, our visitorship, absolutely demonstrates that. We have visitors from across the UK, but we're also significantly global in the sense that we work every year with anything up to about 80 different countries, different performers, different companies. We work in partnership. We also tour. We tour our immersive program, so we are hugely global in our network, and we also welcome international tourists who are visitors to the City of London and square miles. So it's a kind of a complex and very big, I would say, both funding and audience-led ecosystem for us in that respect, and we understand our impact in that way. So if we do something, and I could say this of my previous roles as well in the previous places. If you do something as an organisation of this sort of this scale, the ripple effect is enormous. Because if we set a standard, for example, around inclusivity in programming or sustainability in our operations, then actually everybody else starts to benchmark you. So there's a real benefit in trying to be a field leader, because you don't just, it doesn't just affect you, it affects many. Does that answer your question quite? I didn't quite understand.
It is, yeah. Sorry, it was a broad question. I always ask broad questions, but yeah. What were the main challenges, or what are the main challenges so far that you've encountered on the project? Were there delays or?
Not yet. I don't predict. No, what are they? Obviously funding, but that goes without saying on every single project originally. So I think the biggest challenge, in all honesty, the biggest challenge here for me is how you affect the first really big change to a building that is so now loved. Actually, I know it's Marmite and some people, hate it, but I think it's fair to say now recognized as an icon, to make it work in a way that it needs to now, with the flexibility and the kind of values also that we hold as an organization that are not always the values on which it was founded, while respecting its design integrity, weirdly more challenging here than anywhere I've worked previously, and because there's no queue to pick up from. I think where I've worked before, there's always been someone's always made a big change at some point. You think, oh yeah, look how that can be done. I'll pick that up. I'll run with it. Or you can look at other Victorian buildings that have gone through that process. I think with this, where do you look? All of the buildings of our generation, if you like, of this age, are all coming to the same point at the same time. It's like, oh gosh, we don't quite work anymore in the way that we need to. How do you adapt? And so that's to me the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity. It's really, really exciting. I mean, also, how do you work with a building that's entirely concrete where you can't chase anything in and you can't hide anything? Big problem. That is an issue. It's kind of come with its attendant, inspiration, if you like. So it means that everybody that's attached to the Barbican loves it so deeply. I cannot tell you how strongly held the kind of passion for this place is among those who do love it. And that's both blessing and curse, I suppose. I mean, it means you're very heavily scrutinized. Okay, but that's fair enough. It's not my building. I just look after it for people. But what it does mean is that you have so many people to talk to about it and that will love into it and that actually make you think it is always worthwhile, whatever you're doing it is genuinely, particularly in a site that really does cover every single different art form and creative expression and offers such opportunity for so many people and could offer even more. So that's really, it's both pressure and motivation.
So did I see that there's still an open consultation at the moment? It's still open?
It's open.
People can see the plans?
So we had a public consultation in February, I think, when it was now, which closed, and we gathered all of that feedback, which was extensive, as you can imagine. And we had about 5,000 people come in and look at the displays and the information. And we open again on the 19th of May. We're launching second round of that, where we will feedback on how those comments and suggestions have been incorporated into the design. And then we open up for another round of consultation for about 10 days. Then that will close, and then we will submit for planning in July, and then there will be the statutory consultation that comes out through that process into the autumn. So that's where we are. It's a tip of the iceberg. We have done so much in terms of consultation on this project from the very, very start with our visitors and with our audiences, but also a very embedded process of co-design with 18 to 29-year-olds from locally and from the 4 neighbouring boroughs, just to make sure that we really are interrogating audience need and understanding it and not just basing it on our very particular lens of experience, if you like. So it's been extensive. It's good.
Are there any key aspects or areas you've changed through after doing the consultation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's made us, one big area was looking at the foyers and thinking about welcome and what actually makes for a good welcome. And a lot of that has been it's quite interesting, because what people expect, especially most of us who work here, obviously visit these sorts of places all the time. So we think we know what to expect when we walk through the door and what we want to see to tell us it's an art centre. And actually understanding from audiences who, or for groups who some of them had never been before, that actually a few things, just in terms of allowing space to be a bit less formal, allowing it to be informal, and how you kind of create permissive space, if you like, and bring art out into the space. How do you bring the program forward so people, as soon as they walk through the door, know what you're about? Huge improvement in wayfinding needed. We kind of did already know that, but how we do that in the most inclusive way possible and make it as intuitive as we can. How you use digital infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. So all of that's been impacted. And then looking at the conservatory and how that serves and what its purpose is, that actually, without a clear sense of identity, what does it actually mean for new generations, particularly as they are so much more interested in and committed to biodiversity, sustainability issues around our environment and our climate. So it's almost like its purpose has had to shift and adapt to make sense and to be meaningful, actually, for people who are visiting now. So yeah, huge amount. And I've just come from a session now of putting together an access and inclusivity advisory group, who are going to come and help us really dig in with some really good sort of built environment expertise, dig into how we're providing for every different visitor, every audience need. So yeah, we are desperate to mine everybody's experience, expertise. Really need to hear from audiences. That's been the leader really for us.
Great. And a few people will be wondering about the hall. Do you communicate is there going to be any release anytime soon?
About the concert hall, did you say?
Yeah, concert hall. Yeah.
So Soon, going to be honest, probably not imminently, because we're very focused on the other spaces at the moment. But certainly as the project progresses, I'm sure there will be more to say.
So the website where we can see the press release, I'll put it in the comments, barbican.org.uk, but obviously if we look for it, I've looked for it like Barbican Centre Renovation, found it straight away.
Yeah, Barbican Renewal. If you look up Barbican Renewal, you'll almost certainly find a wealth of information.
And if people want to reach out to you, I guess they can connect on LinkedIn?
Yes, absolutely. Please do. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been pretty quick, but it's been efficient, and it's been very, very great.
I hope I've covered everything and not been too efficient, but do let me know if you want me to.
It's great. It felt like times 1.5 to times 2.
I think that other people that I work with might agree with you. That's good. We like to go at speed. Like to go.
No, it's just straight to the point. Well, thank you very much, Philippa.
Thank you, Mark. It's
and
really great discussing.
Hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thank you. You too.